Welcome back everybody to The Forge. We are gonna dive headfirst into Python today. The first thing you need to understand is that computers really only understand one language, and that language is binary, ones and zeros. Believe it or not, programmers used to actually interact with computers in binary language. They would write entire programs using just binary. Doesn't sound like fun to me. And it wasn't fun for them either. That's why we started developing programming languages. A clean interface between human and computer that meant we could give computers instructions. Now there's a long, rich history of computer languages and how that technology has advanced over time. But this class is primarily about getting you the fundamentals of the Python language. Now let's just talk a little more about what sets Python apart. Python is what we call an interpreted language. Now there are other interpreted languages as well. An interpreted language means that the execution of the code happens as the code is being read by the computer or by an interpreter. Other languages like C, for example, are what are called compiled languages. Again, remember what I said, the only language a computer understands is binary. In a compiled language, something called the compiler takes the entire program you write and translates it all down into binary before it actually executes the program. Interpreted languages do that on the fly. As the interpreter moves over the lines of code that you write, it translates it into binary and executes on the spot. Now it sounds like obviously interpreted languages are better, they're way more versatile. But the truth is there's cases where one is more appropriate than the other to use. But that being said, Python is a very versatile language and is used for so many different things, from making games to running websites to really intense cybersecurity tools to data mining, just about anything. The first thing you really need to know is syntax. Now syntax applies to any language, even spoken languages. All syntaxes are the rules of a language. Think about English. English has rules. We capitalize the beginning of every sentence. We put a punctuation mark at the end of every sentence. We put space in between each word. These are rules for the English language. Well, just like English has syntax or rules, Python has syntax or rules. You have to write it a certain way for the computer to understand. One of the biggest differences between Python syntax and most other programming languages out there is that white space matters. If you've ever done any programming in Java or C# or C++, you know about a little guy called the semicolon. That semicolon is the bane of many a programmer's existence. And honestly, the use of it can lead to some bad habits because it doesn't force you to write the code in a spaced out and clear way. This is where the creator of Python came along and said, no, we're gonna make you indent your code in a nice, readable way so that anyone that reads it has a fair chance at understanding it. So, rule number one about Python, white space matters. Over the next few weeks, we're going to go over all the basic data types of Python, but we're going to start with numbers. Now in Python version 3, the one that we're going to be learning, there are two types of number data that you can use, and those are ints, short for integers, and floats, or floating point numbers, or decimal numbers. Ints, or integers, are nothing more than positive or negative whole numbers. So if you were to do 5 plus 5, that's adding two ints, 5 and 5. Important to note, when writing your Python code, when you write an int, you write just the number itself. Floats are short for floating point numbers, or decimal numbers, a number that is not a whole number. And those are your two basic number data types in Python. That's all you got to worry about. But of course, it's not very useful just to type ints or floats into a Python program. You want to do something with those. We're going to talk a lot more about functions later, but you're going to learn some of the built-in functions in the Python language to be able to manipulate these numbers. And not only are we going to learn some of those functions, we're also going to learn some operators. And operators in Python are really pretty much a one-to-one translation from mathematical operators. Things like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. To add in Python, we use the plus sign. Go figure. To subtract in Python, we use the minus sign. To multiply in Python, we use the asterisk. To divide in Python, we use the backslash. Pretty straightforward. Functions essentially represent some pre-written code somewhere that can manipulate data based on what data you give that function. The only one we really need to be super familiar with right now is the print function. You already use this in your Hello World assignment where you print parentheses hello world. Function name print followed by the parentheses is what gives it away as a function. And print prints whatever you put inside of those parentheses out to the console. So you could write a program that has the int 5 plus the int 5 and run that program, but if you run that, you're not going to see anything. What you want to do is print the result of that mathematical operation. So if you print parentheses 5 plus 5, you should see 10 pop out the other end. Last thing I want to note before you go off on your own are errors. Error handling in Python is great, because if you try to run your program and there's an issue with your syntax, it's gonna let you know. In the console, you'll likely get a big red message, and somewhere in that message, it'll say on line whatever, line 2, line 3, line 56. On this line, there's an issue with the syntax. Really, this is just the computer saying, hey, there's something wrong here, and I can't continue to run this program until you fix it. We'll dive a lot more into errors and more intricate error handling as we get into the course. For now, if you come up against an error or a bug that you just can't get rid of and you can't get it to work, just reach out to me and we'll get your program set straight. So let's have some fun with numbers in the demo before we talk about variables next week. See you in the Forge.